So, jumping on, I would introduce our sponsoring company today, CEO Health Analytics, which may be a new company to some of you, but they are originally Data Intelligence, and they rebranded the name earlier this year. And CEO Health Analytics really specialise in business intelligence, advanced analytic solutions across the global life science industry. They really provide those data management solutions that help bring together disparate, fragmented data, complex data, bring under control to give business users the insights they need. They also provide consultancy activities in sales force effectiveness, high-level analytics, and other advanced data management and associated analytical activities that their clients require. So with a sort of introduction to CEO Health Analytics, I should introduce our speakers today, and I'm very pleased to have Christian Gar and Mark Feeney, who are going to be our presenters today. Christian is the analytics consultant in the UK here, and Christian has worked in the pharmaceutical industry since 2005. He has a deep involvement in Salesforce effectiveness projects and has worked for a number of companies of various sizes. These include Kantar Health when it was TNS, and on the client side with Bristol Myers Squibb. Christian's role in CEO Health Analytics is where he heads up the CEO expert product side of their organisation, and this delivers those solutions and insights for clients through consultative analytics. He's strong experience in quota setting, incentive compensation, and involvement in report and dashboard designs to clients' reporting platforms. Chris is a mathematician by background, as well as having a postgraduate diploma in operational research from the University of Southampton. Monty is a life science consultant for Health Analytics, and he's calling in and joining us today from across the pond in the US. Mark's area of specialities really include project and operational management for commercial effectiveness, patient analytics applications, including HCP targeting, patient longitudinal analytics, Salesforce restructuring, and KOL identification, among other areas. He has extensive experience in a wide range of life science data, including prescriber RX, and pharmacy claims data, lab data from the medical side, and some marketing data, as well as demographics, social, economic, and consumer lifestyle data that may be used for segmentation and such like. So with that said, I'd like to hand over to Christian and Mark and send Lord to what they've got to tell us about today. Over to you, Christian and Mark.
Everyone, it's Christian here. Thanks very much for that introduction, Guy. We'll move on to the deck now. So what we're talking about today is Salesforce effectiveness. As an introduction to the topic, so I'm sure most of you are aware, Salesforce effectiveness, or SFE, what it's actually all about. It's there to ensure that your sales force can be as effective as possible, given the fact that they are a huge investment for your company. And this was probably around about 10 years ago, actually, that an average sales rep, it's around £100,000 in total with all the overheads. So a number of those people out in the field, you want to make sure that huge investment will give you the significant return that you need in order to drive your company forward. So what we're looking at today is some tips and tricks, some new techniques potentially, given that the landscape is changing and customers are harder to see. So we've got a customer-centric approach to some of the areas that we're going to talk about today. Talk about which areas they are next. So we're looking at targeting and segmentation, sales sizing and structuring, call planning, and incentive targets. Some of you may have seen closed-loop marketing on the website. We're not going to cover that because it's still fairly embryonic in that particular area. So we're looking to sort of build our experience in that area, and then we'll be able to share that potentially at a later date. So to let you know, we won't be covering that today. Now to hand over to Mark, my colleague in Boston in the US, and start with the targeting section.
Thanks, Christian, and good afternoon, everyone. Great to be here.
I'll just say before you start, Mark, sorry, do you want me to run the poll first, or are we straight in?
Well, that'd be great.
Yes. Good shout, Aline. Sorry, yeah. So we'll run that first poll question now, based on the 4 topics that we're looking at today. Thank you.
Okay.
And see the poll on your screen there.
Yeah, we've got the question here, everyone, that's based around the topics that we're looking at today. So which of these areas are your focus or your clients' focuses for this year? The multiple choice question. So if you can give your answers, and then we'll move on to the next section. Do you want at this point, Mark?
I think as most organizations are probably doing one of these, as they're pretty critical for commercial effectiveness. So it'll be interesting to see what these find are high priorities.
Sure. These are all business critical functions, so I would assume that our attendees will be focusing on at least one of them.
I'm just poll now. It looks like targeting and segmentation is in the lead, so hopefully I will be able to show you the results.
Okay, that's interesting to see. So targeting and segmentation there with them, and only a couple of others. So it looks like that there are four good topics to be talking about, which is reassuring. So
very good.
Aline?
Yep.
Great, thank you. Over to you, Mark.
And again, good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here today. I'm going to talk about on this segment is account evaluation and targeting, which is a pretty critical aspect of sales force effectiveness. And what we're going to talk about a few things here is kind of going beyond your traditional approaches to value to accounts. And you're very much here in the UK and across Europe and even in the United States, the current pharma market is seeing fewer opportunities to accounts and healthcare providers, and therefore identifying and viewing them correctly is of critical importance. There's so many physicians or accounts that your source is able to see, and you want to be able to sure you identify and prioritize those accordingly. The traditional approach to valuing accounts has typically been based on the total prescribing in the therapeutic area or market RX of that account, and certainly, that has helped over the years to identify and value these accounts, but not always the best approach going forward. It is a very simplified approach, but falls short on a number of key metrics that we're going to discuss as we move further along within the presentation. And certainly, I think we also, pharma companies need to take into account the product's life cycle, the stage within the life cycle, which I think is also of critical importance, whether you're starting out on a launch or you're more on a decline phase. So we'll talk about that as well. To the next slide. This is the chart of the kind of the typical product life cycle stage, and there's 4 segments or stages that a product typically falls in, and depending on the age, the promotional efforts of the sales team in a particular will change focus. Certainly at launch stage, when a product is just launching, that you have approval by your agency, you're going to throw all your reps out there, have full coverage, have full frequency, and typically you want to certainly get at the innovators out there, large presses or accounts that have a lot of innovators that are willing to start driving your product at launch. And then as the product launches, and it could be 6 months to 18 months, somewhere around that, you're going to be a lot of have hopefully growth, Stage, again, you want to slightly change your focus. You want to look at who has been prescribing, what accounts have been prescribing your products, and really focus on those loyal customers, and then start to identify early adopters as well. And we'll talk about early adopters and innovators and whole adoption sequence in a slide coming up as well. And as the product moves along into the test phase, you have more of a mature product. And then it's time to kind of change your focus slightly. You want to fine-tune to include profitable targets. You potentially defend your market share. You want to limit any RX loss to competitors if possible. And then as we move on along the time scale, we have a bit of a decline. This is where potentially other products are coming onto the market. You might be losing exclusivity because of generics coming in as well. And you typically have a reduction in your overall marketing and promotional efforts at this time. So again, change focus based on the product life cycle is important. So does your product fit in to this lifestyle? The product lifestyle is pretty important. Talked about early on, the traditional approach to valuing accounts and healthcare providers has been looking at market RX, so how much prescribing has been happening in the therapeutic area. And, as I said, that's typical approach, easy to implement, but a number of other potential metrics out there that we could look at to what we call a composite score. And depending on availability of the data that you have in-house or by a third-party vendor, you can get this composite score based on a number of these other metrics. For example, not only looking at market RX, but certainly looking at product has been out in the market for a while. You can look at your client brand RX, which is certainly important to identify accounts that are just prescribing your product. Spreader is pretty important. Those are accounts or physicians that have a tendency to prescribe several products versus only a small number of products. And spreading is usually good as spreading accounts are not committed to a single product. So potentially you have the option or you have the chance to hook those other accounts with a promotion, which if possible. Product adoption sequence I talked about a little bit, and that's really based on the diffusion of innovations by Everett Rogers. And Mr. Rogers came up with 5 different categories of adoption of a product, and those include innovators, early adopters, early majority, and lags. So identifying which of those accounts or their providers fit into those adoption categories could be also very important as well. Ratio also could be important. That's an account's or physician's ability to convert script from NRX to TRX. So certainly you want to be able to get the conversions, get those accounts to continue to write your product. So physicians or accounts propensity to stick with a particular portfolio of drugs in the long term. So you want to have kind of the loyalty of those accounts to write your drugs. Avoidance is also pretty important in that you want to identify accounts that are just writing all drugs. Certainly that's much harder to switch those accounts if they're near 95% of their portfolio is only generic. So if there are accounts that are much lower than that, certainly that could go into metrics. If data is available down to the patient level, I know it's not always available in certain markets, but a diagnosed treatment ratio based on patient data could be of critical importance as well. So all of these different components, metrics together, coming with a composite score is a more advanced way of valuing accounts versus just looking at a traditional market RX. How do we do this? We have all this data. We identify the appropriate metrics we want to do the analysis, and so we need to model all the metrics into a composite score And one of the first things you might want to is normalize or standardize the values, in that you might have some metrics that are large, some metrics that are small, some are raw values, some are percentages. And so standardizing those metrics in one way or another, it could be done on standard deviations and averages, or some other standardization and normalization technique to fit those in a particular normalized fashion. And creating the composite score, and what could be of great importance is to weight those metrics individually, in that each metric might not be weighted the same. You could have a generic avoidance, 30% weight. You could have RX ability at a 20% rate, and forth. So depending on kind of the goals of your product and the end, weight those accordingly could be of importance as well. And then finally, once you've identified the metrics, you've created your composite score, and then typically what's done is deciling those accounts based on equal volume of the composite score, where you have 10 buckets, and each bucket has an equal number of composite. Only fewer accounts at the higher deciles, the 8s, 9s, and 10s will have accounts, but an equal number of composite scores. So those are potentially the accounts that you want to focus on. And certainly, a call frequency is the next step, and it's not as easy as just assigning 36 calls to 10. Certainly, there's additional analysis that should go into identifying the call frequency per year value to each decile. But as an example, you've deciled all of your accounts into the 10 buckets. You might have determined that for decile 10s, for example, you'll be called on or detailed 36 times a year, decile 9s at 24 times a year, 8s and 7s at 18 times a year, and so forth. And additional analysis is usually needed to identify the ideal calls per year based on the decile. And finally, this idea of valuing and targeting physicians is certainly not static. It should be updated, on a quarterly basis, perhaps, or biannually. Certainly, continuously monitoring your accounts, your targets, your accounts, looking at the prescribing of those accounts. Certainly, some accounts might move up or move down over that time period. You might have stars, if you will, that are writing more as time goes on. So continually fine-tuning the composite scores, potentially adding different metrics or dropping metrics from the composite score, and adjust your reach frequency accordingly over time. And again, you might be doing this quarterly or semi-annually, at least annually for certain, to make sure that you have the optimal number of targets and the optimal valuing of those targets. I think I'm going to end right there and pass it back to you.
Thanks, Mark. Targeting and also some segmentation at the end, and I wanted to move on to some other segmentation techniques. There are a number of techniques available, but I want to cover off a couple that are particularly hot. Mark, can you hand control back to me?
I'm sorry, Christian, I don't see how to do that.
There we go.
Oh, there we go. Great.
Okay, so everyone, we should be on the segmentation slide now. So there's a number of techniques available. I just want to cover off a couple that are particularly useful and fairly easy to execute. And in the case of the Boston Matrix segmentation, gives you four segments. And I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with the term GLAD. It's just an acronym to cover off the four segments: grow, lead, back, and develop. And how that comes about is by ranking all the practices and based on, typically you would want to use market share potential, but there are a number of other metrics that can be used in this particular technique, and it works equally well, even if you do happen to have HCP level data, which I know is very rare in the UK, almost across the board, but account level data is available, be that hospitals, be that practices, depending on the setting of primary or secondary care. Data to be available for your own products, even if not for competitors. So you need to make sure that you use the available data, or that you use something suitable for what you're trying to do. But in terms of the technique itself, you just rank on one of your metrics, the top half giving them ones, the bottom half giving them twos, or A's and B's, doesn't really matter. Rank on the other metric and perform the same exercise, so top half and bottom half. And what you then, when you concatenate those values, is a simple Boston matrix, which in a fairly quick time, it allows you to see your key target accounts. Typically would be the attack accounts, where you've got a high market share in this scenario with a high potential, and you've got your at the other end of the scale, you've got your leave accounts, where it's advisable probably not to spend too much time or too much focus on those accounts. Low market share, they've got low sales of your own product, or low market potential, depending on which metric you use, and there's no chance that they'll actually drive many of your sales. So again, on the area of not being able to cover all of your accounts, you don't have that sort of resource, especially these days. Things are more. Therefore, we need to make sure that we've got a means of targeting a select few or half of the accounts potentially. It's about decile segmentation, which can be based on a number of different metrics. So prescribing data, access data, influence these days is coming into the picture in terms of the HCPs. And again, you can apply different weightings depending on your desired outcome. And it's also very important to keep talking about the accuracy of the data and the availability of data. So certain metrics may not be or may not hold so much water, if you like, and therefore it's really desirable to downweight those as opposed to sort of prescribing data, which from the NHS these days is the actual real data. So that can sort of be upweighted accordingly. And one thing to touch on here is regarding the reps' input, which is all very important to get their buy-in, and also they're going to have local geographical knowledge that you're not going to be able to know about in sort of head office exercise. It's all very well to sort of go through the motions and do all segmentation based on the data that you've got, and sort of think that that's completely robust and 100% accurate, but they're not out there in the field, and there it's really important from the two perspectives. And also, you can do a sort of more basic segmentation where you're looking at tiers or gold, silver, bronze type of thing, where you tend to take the top hits. It really depends on how much resource you've got to the reach, which we'll touch as well. To the next section on Salesforce sizing and structuring. I'd like to go for the second poll question, so thanks for putting that up there, Aline. So this question, we're talking about within yours and your clients' current SAP processes, with the biggest challenges. So we've got three different answers there, all of the above or none of the above. So you can vote now, and we'll just leave that open for a few moments in order to let people make their selections. I'll just give that another 10 seconds, and there'll be see those results.
Okay, yeah, there's a couple of people still voting, but I think we've probably got everyone. So I will close, and then we just have to wait for the seconds for it to collate.
I'll be with us momentarily.
I don't think we want votes there. I think we sort of caught a few people unawares popping that poll up, and so but we've got probably about half the responses, or a bit more than that maybe.
Yeah.
So, there we go. Hopefully you can see those now.
Yeah, again, interesting to see. So that the highest answer there, fairly sample size, but 8 out of the 33 have gone with in-house resource. So not actually having the time to undertake these exercises to the degree that's desired, I guess. Often there's other priorities that get in the way, and we're very familiar with that. So I'll hand back over to Mark now to cover off Salesforce sizing and structuring. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Christian. And yeah, certainly, that poll, I think we're very well aware of working industry that it's hard to do everything. So having the industry resources certainly is a challenge. Talk a little bit here about Salesforce sizing and structuring. And there's many reasons to restructure your Salesforce. Do you do it, and why do you do it? Some examples up here of when and why you might want to restructure your Salesforce. Certainly, if you're to a market and you have a new product launch, you need to identify as well the right targets and then the right reps for your Salesforce to market that product, that new product. As we talked about earlier in the life cycle or life cycle stage of the product, more mature products, you might want to decrease your promotional efforts and potentially downsize your sales forces. Other change in market conditions, whether new products come to market, might be able to size or size your sales force accordingly. Mergers or acquisitions, so forth. So potentially a number of times during your product life cycle when, or your company, when might want to create a new sales force or modify your sales force. So why do you want to restructure? Apply advanced analytics to achieve optimal results, as we talked about, just using kind of old hat methodologies, identifying new ways and using advanced analytics. Certainly aligning your sales capacity with market potential, optimizing your sales forces based on workload, increase efficiency, and reduce travel time costs, which is critical. Being able to target the most beneficial accounts for the success of your brand, and certainly right-sizing the sales force, whether that's increasing, decreasing, or maintaining the number of sales reps. And often the case if you have a specialized product that requires a specialized sales force, so in addition to maybe your primary care sales force, having a specialized sales force or hospital-based sales force, the product also would be a good reason why you might want to change or reach your sales force. Because of Salesforce restructuring, certainly you want to have work balance. As each sales rep has roughly the same workload, same potential, and again, that workload can be based on a number of other metrics. It can be based on market or it could be based on that composite metric that we talked about before. Certainly, workload balance is important. It allows for coverage of clients and prospects, increases market penetration. It improves team morale if everybody has kind of an equal playing field, if you will. Market potential balance is also a prime objective. Rep evaluations on similar terms. Earning potentials are equalized. It's more of an acceptance by reps when all the reps have a market potential balance. Travel efficiency is certainly very important as well. You're having less windshield time, which results in more face-to-face selling time of the reps. Certainly you want your reps to be detailing, not spending a lot of time traveling and also certainly reducing costs when you have travel efficiency. Minimizing disruption is also pretty important. So your reps have maintained strong client relationships with their accounts, and you want to minimize that disruption. You want to be able to keep, your good reps and your good client relationships intact, if at all possible. It only results in higher customer satisfaction and retention, and kind of lower transition costs. Now, when you're really increasing your sales force, twofold or threefold, certainly it might be difficult to miss a disruption, but at a cost, it's ideal if that's possible. So the basic objective of Salesforce restructuring, and down to the data certainly, and compiling and integrating multiple data sources is probably the most difficult part of the type of analysis. And certainly a number of different data sources available out there that have a number of different metrics that you could use part of your Salesforce size and nurturing project. We talked about gathering the account level RX data. Again, in the United States and other countries, level data might be available. Certainly, if you have an existing sales force, you want to look at your current targets, and making sure that you're potentially minimizing the disruption of those targets. If there are any accounts that should be called on, you want to incorporate those no-call lists. And certainly for existing sales force, you want to look at your current rep roster, and if possible, redefining and restructuring your sales force to kind of keep those reps in place, again, to minimize costs for having to relocate sales representatives. Not always possible, but if doable, certainly would go a long way to develop the organization to kind of minimize the rep movements. So again, collecting all the data up front is a very critical part of a sales size and structure project, and making sure you have all the data sources available before you commence the project. The typical 4 steps to doing source size and structure project, and that first pre-step, the account evaluation that we talked about earlier in the presentation, is certainly probably one of the most critical aspects of the methodology, and that you'll be able to identify and value the accounts appropriately, and then determine accounts to target. So again, that's critical, defining the three-step process of account evaluation and segmentation, as Christian talked about as well. There's 4 kind of big steps that we'll talk here: the scenario planning, peer optimization, carrier alignment, and the formal review. And throughout all of these, we're looking at the data, we're applying potentially some advanced analytics to come up with a delivery of what Salesforce size and structure should look like. And those steps now. The Salesforce planning is critical. This is where we're defining several scenarios based upon the input and measures. So we're looking at things like number of accounts per workload measure or your composite score, your market RX per your decile, your composite score or workload decile, the amount of client RX that you have per decile, calls per decile. Again, that's pretty important to perform the analysis to determine the number of detailed calls that should be associated with each decile per year. Again, something else that needs to be considered, whether it's you're calling on accounts 6 times a day or 7 times or 8 times a day, how many days a week, if it's 5 days a week, how many weeks per year. Typically somewhere between 1,700 and 2,000 work hours per year per rep as a rough gauge with the math to determine that. So that all goes into kind of inputs, and certainly if there's certain specialties that you're interested in, specialty sales force or if it's a primary care sales force, you want to take that into consideration. And self-control. How many reps are you thinking about having? How many managers, how many regional managers go into account as well. So identify all these input scenarios, and then get through your scenario planning to come up with output measures, which is the goal. So the output measures would be things like total territories that we're going to end up with, the work per territory, coverage, the RX brand coverage, the number of accounts to target, number of accounts per territory. You can run several different scenarios with the input measures and come up with 5, 6, 7, 8 different scenarios that you then provide for further review to go on to the next stage. Stage is the territory optimization stage, and that's where we identify a scenario or two. You might have defined 6 or 8 different scenarios, and then through for analysis, whether it's on budget or other considerations, it's bringing those down to 1, 2, perhaps 3 scenarios, where then you're going to run through a territory optimization model. And there's a number of software applications, both in-house and by third-party vendors, that have optimization models. And then these models typically will work on a postal code level or an account level, for example. So your data will be aggregated to that level of geography. Running through the model typically will balance the postcodes, get aggregated up at the territory level, so you'll have balanced workload, so equal number of calls per rep per year. And again, we talked about minimizing overall travel time, which is important. And typically, you want to be able to find optimal territory centers. Again, if there's an existing sales force, you might take into account where you currently live. If it's a brand new sales force, it's a clean slate, if you will. So the model can be where is the best location for rep service the accounts within that territory. And so we talked about minimizing disruption, which is of equal importance as well. The organization models out there typically, they're advanced mathematical models, and they're analyzing millions of geography to territory combinations to come up with the optimal scenario. And also of importance if you can take into account the road and highway networks of geographies as well, which is of critical importance. So at the end of this territory optimization stage, we have 1, 2, or 3 different optimizations that assign either the accounts and the geographies to X number of sales territories. And on to the step 3 here is where we're taking that solution, and that's typically 80% solution through the territory optimization phase, and then we're doing more of a review of that optimization and a territory alignment where we're actually making manual adjustments. That is, we're moving accounts slightly, we're moving postal codes slightly based on existing relationships, or fine-tuning, if you will. I guess to a 90% solution, where now we're ready to do the 4th step, which is a final review. And this is typically where you want to get not only your lists involved, the operations teams involved, but it's a great idea to get your field managers involved as well. And as you alluded to earlier, the field managers are on the street. They know accounts, they know their geographies very, very well. And to the field manager's input, be very helpful. Not they redesign everything, but gives them to review it, makes changes, actually having an interactive session with the managers where they can sit in front of the computer and look at the maps and look at the spreadsheets. And if that makes sense, that doesn't make sense, and spend some time to review it and get their buy-in, I think, is of critical importance as well. Generating the maps and the territory files and the replication files get you to a 98% solution. You'll never have a 100% solution. There's always going to be changes that happen throughout the year that you're tweaking territories and you're tweaking accounts. But this process kind of gets you to a very good, well-defined sales force size and structure plan. And since you.
I've also noticed a question's come in from one of our attendees around software tools that can be used. I think that was in relation to resizing or setting and structuring. Our preference is for a piece of software called Tactician in that particular space. We've got a lot of experience with. In fact, Mark's got a huge amount of experience with that particular software and indeed with the company. So, can everyone still hear me? I just saw someone's mentioned that the audio's gone. Aline, can you hear me?
Yes, I think sometimes it does just cut in and out for individuals, so it should come back in a minute.
I'll leave that one then.
Yeah.
So Tactician is one that we favour. It's got some really powerful algorithms that really help to ensure maximum efficiency, including drive times. So you get all of the contributing factors into the mix that Mark covered off in that last section. So I'll move about sales incentive targets. As you're probably aware, that they're used as one of the key motivating factors for field-based employees. We've been talking about throughout the webinar that they need to be joined up with the brand strategy, and that was likely to be related to the place in the product's life cycle. So that again, talking about availability of data, of a product launch, you're not going to have any back data by definition. They're going to want to be able to use other metrics or other values in order to help you with that. So about sales incentive target setting, there could be around growth expectation, typically for a period, so a quarter or a trimester or a 6-month period. It could be around capturing market share as your brand strategy, penetrating the market at launch, integrating new accounts or a certain value or a territory level. So all of these different ways, as well as there should be a stretch for field-based users, but equally they need to be realistic and equitable, and you want to make sure that everyone's got the same possibility of reaching their target value. The same earning capacity is really important. The cycles here again, if we're looking at a launch brand, then typically you're going to want to use a shorter cycle. You can get more periods in the year. As you progress, you're going to see what's happening in each particular territory, where you're getting that penetration, and make more changes. For a mature brand, you should be more confident in your target setting by nature of the fact that you've got all that back data, and the sales are more predictable in most cases. Now, you take into consideration how long the exercise takes in terms of you're going to do this for all of your brands. So if you've got multiple brands, and it's going to be a larger effort. At the same time, you don't be, in my experience, you don't want to be setting targets for a 12-month period at the outset, because you're not going to have that certainty around the months in the year. And also can be important to hook to link the targets in with the latest projection or the latest estimate or budgeting processes that are done by finance. And I'll come on to that a little later. So you need to take into consideration the data that's available in terms of the periodicity. So if you wait longer, then you're going to have more recent data that you can use to set your targets for the following cycle or trimester. At the same time, you may then actually be looking into that trimester and actually releasing the targets or even 2 months into the period, which is far from ideal for a number of reasons. You've got to get that balance right and make sure that you get the target communicated to the field force as soon as possible, while using the data the latest data that's available, making sure that you get that balance. Techniques that I found particularly successful over the years is based on this sort of 7-step approach. So through those steps there. So the first step is to validate the latest budget or the latest projection estimate from finance. And at that stage, that can involve going backwards and forwards a few times with the field with the finance team. You've got to understand the assumptions that have been used and the market factors, new launches, new indications, genericization. In my experience, I've seen when the views come through from finance and there's a steep jump or a steep decline, and you're seeing an increase in sales. But once you ratify that in terms of what's actually happening in the marketplace, you may find out that there's a new indication for your brand, which you're expecting then to have a much more significant increase. There could be a new brand being launched, a new competitor brand, which is anticipated to take a significant amount of market share. And in case you may be looking at a decline. So make sure that you get those bits ratified, because that starting number is really important to be 100% accurate, or as accurate as possible into those assumptions. You then need to pull together all the back data for your own product and for a market by territory. So in an ideal scenario, you will have that back data. In this particular use case, that we're assuming that that's available, and that you can define your market accordingly based on indications that you have your brand and the other brands that are in that marketplace. You then calculate your KPIs and metrics, and these could be growth, they could be market share, they could be market share growth for one to use, and then another one which is headroom, which I always explain by saying it's the difference between your own product sales and the territory, the market sales in absolute terms. So in that you could have market share of 10% on two territories. If one territory is £1 million territory, then you've got 900k of headroom there. In £1,000 territory, you've only got £900 of headroom. So extreme example, but identifies there what headroom is. Important. The next step is indexing these territories against the national value or the national average to make sure that you got those index values. And step 5, you need to normalise. And I think Mark talked about this earlier in terms of the territory size and structuring. You need to ensure that each of the KPIs is not over contributing towards the final index by normalising or standardising in some way. But you can also weight certain metrics more if you want to. But you want to make sure that you've not got a metric that's overweighted just by coincidence. Average of all these index values across all the KPIs per territory, and that will give you a growth expectation ranking. And then looking at the national growth expectation guide, that should be round about in the middle, and then you need to set your territories about that central value with the highest growth and the lowest growth set accordingly. So, for example, with a 10% national growth, it might be appropriate to set sort of 415 at the top end, 6 or 7 at the bottom end, but that will vary based on a number of factors. But in my experience, that those sort of values will go with good targets. After step 7, that gives you the first pass of the targets, and then there can be a number of toing and froing internally within the organisation in terms of match tweaks with local territory knowledge. So of course, all of this, like I was saying earlier, all of this calculations is based on purely on data. The external factors, which are known more by the reps or the RBMs, are important to get into the mix, tweak those targets, and then finalised across the business and communicated out to the reps who are on the street who need to actually hit those targets. Brings us to the end of what we talk about today. Thanks for your time, and do we have any questions?
Thank you very much, Mr. Christian and Mark. If there's any questions, if you can use the Q&A app on the right-hand side of your screen and just type your question in, we'll pick the question up and answer it. In the meantime, I guess this goes both out to both Christian and Mark, is when setting up a new scheme and then taking that into for sizing and structuring, what time frame are you looking at there for setting up a full sort of program around a new product launch, for example?
This is Mark. Thanks, Guy, for that question. Yeah, it really depends on the complexity of your project. And I think, as I alluded to earlier, the availability of your data sources, sometimes all the available data sources, whether they have to be purchased by a third-party vendor or if they're in-house data sources, take the longest. So you might want to, a couple of weeks for actually identifying and securing the data sources, and perhaps a couple more weeks to do your advanced analytics and modeling on that, and then prepare for the source size and structure, which again could take a few more weeks throughout the 4 stages. So simply somewhere probably between 4 and 8 weeks, depending on the size of the project, available data sources, and so getting approval throughout the organization can take time as well. So all that should be considered.
And Christian here, with regard to target setting, much the same story with respect to actually pulling that data together. It's really important that that data is as accurate as possible and is cleansed, and that you're not sort of using the wrong data and have to then go back and run through the process itself of running the indexing and the scoring to get your rankings of growth expectation is not overly onerous. If you the strategy or the technique, but the preparing of the data in the first place is really critical. So in terms of target setting, it can be performed in a week, but at the end of the process, the sort of toing and froing with managers internally to get things finalised, experience can be the thing that takes the longest.
Okay, so you mentioned representative engagement in the process, and people see rep into field force design, target lists, etc., as very, very important. People have a view that the rep input can devalue the process. What's your experience around those two sort of arguments on either side?
Certainly, I think in our experience, rep involvement is probably, it could kind of the project going longer than it needs to be, and so having more of the management involvement, I think, is more of critical importance, whether it be at the district or the regional level. So that's probably more important and critical than actually having rep involvement. Reps can know their territory and their geography very well, but a manager is going to know, 10 or 20 reps geography very well. So having the input more at the higher level of the sales management level is probably certainly more important and more critical than at the rep level. Christian, anything else to add to that?
Down to the company culture as to whether or not that's sort of difficult to have that rep input. But I would say that I think it's important because they're the ones that are working out in the field, and you need to get their buy-in. And that really is one of those things with their input that automatically almost guarantees buy-in if they feel that they're part of the process and they've not just been had these target lists imposed on them. And also, you need to recognise that their input is not just sort of service. They've got experience. They've been out there. They know certain customers may not be able to be seen. As it's almost impossible. Certain customers, if you sort of create a target list where you say, well, these are the targets, and you take into consideration those other softer metrics, if you like, then you can set yourself up for a fall at the outset. I've seen there's another question come in here regarding the KPIs and metrics for incentive target setting. So, as I mentioned, my interest to use sales growth and over 2 different periods. So you've got sort of a shorter period to show you what's going on more recently, as well as the long trend, which could be based on MAT on MAT. So sales growth and market share very, very important to use. Again, you could use market share over 2 different periods, and market share growth typically will be over 2 different cycles. So how have they grown from one cycle to the next? And then the headroom as well is one to take into consideration. It's to say that when you are doing your indexing and normalizing, you should make sure that your metrics are organized such that the full index is correct. So you've got you need to sort them out so that you've got growth leading to growth, and high market share leading to lower growth. So you don't be adversely pushing somebody for achieving high market share or for delivering market share growth. In those scenarios, then that should sort of downweight your growth expectation for the next cycle in order to temper your current growth, which will typically increase your growth expectation for the next cycle. So you know that you get those round the right way, so that you've not got conflicting metrics.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We have hit the bottom of the hour and we're nearly at past. I would like to just take this chance to say thank you to everybody that's joined the call. I hope you found that very, very informative. If you want to follow up with either Mark or Christian, please feel free to do so. Mark, Christian, I'd like to thank you so much for your time today and taking SEFI, etc. and draw an end to the meeting. So to everybody out there, have a wonderful Friday. Have a fantastic weekend, and thank you very much for attending.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.